greatest aviation mysteries since the plane, a Boeing 777, disappeared en route to Beijing from Kuala Lumpur.
Authorities are urgently studying the captain's at-home flight simulator for clues.
It looked like a wing. It was the wing off a bloody aircraft.
To really tear at the fabric of reality that a whole jetliner has just disappeared.
A decade has passed since Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished without a trace, yet the world's fascination and heartbreak has never waned. What was once a sudden tragedy has evolved into one of modern aviation's most perplexing enigmas, haunted by silence and speculation. Now, after 11 years, it is rumored that an underwater drone has finally revealed the location of Malaysian Flight 370. As hope rekindles and questions resurface, the world once again turns its gaze toward the skies, daring to believe that the truth may yet be within reach. So, what exactly went wrong with MH370? And how close are we to unveiling the wreckage? Let's find out. Flight MH370's final journey. In the dark, humid early hours of March 8, 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight 370 took to the skies from Kuala Lumpur International Airport at 12:41 a.m. local time. The aircraft, a Boeing 777-200ER bearing registration 9M-MRO, was a wide-body, long-range jetliner known for its robust design and strong safety record. Introduced into service in 2002, the aircraft was just over 11 years old and had accumulated approximately 53,465 flight hours over 7,525 takeoff and landing cycles. It had most recently undergone a routine maintenance check on February 23, 2014, just 12 days before its final departure, and was deemed fully airworthy. Its 6-hour journey to Beijing Capital International Airport was supposed to be uneventful, like the thousands of other regional and international flights completed daily by the carrier. Yet, what began as a standard red-eye flight across Southeast Asia quickly transformed into one of the most baffling and haunting mysteries in modern aviation. Flight MH370 was about to make history, and not the right kind. At the helm of the cockpit sat Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran of Malaysia Airlines with an impressive 33 years of experience. At 53 years of age, Zahari had logged 18,165 flying hours, much of it on Boeing 777 aircraft. By all accounts, he was a calm, meticulous, and technically proficient pilot who had a passion for flight simulators and aviation mechanics. He had no reported disciplinary issues and had successfully passed all health and psychological evaluations. Accompanying him in the right seat was First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid, a young and aspiring aviator just shy of his 28th birthday. Though relatively inexperienced in comparison to his captain, Farik had amassed nearly 2,800 flight hours and was in the final stage of his training on the Boeing 777. This was to be his first flight operating without a supervising check pilot, an important milestone in his career. The crew was rounded out by 10 cabin crew members, all Malaysians and well-trained. On board were a total of 239 people, 227 passengers, and 12 crew members. The manifest listed 153 Chinese nationals, making up the majority of the passengers, along with 38 Malaysians. The remaining 36 individuals hailed from 12 different countries, 7 from Indonesia, 6 from Australia, 5 from India, 4 from France, 3 from the United States, 2 from Iran, 2 from Ukraine, 2 from Canada, 2 from New Zealand, 1 from Russia, 1 from the Netherlands, and 1 from Taiwan. Among the passengers were families, couples, business professionals, students, artists, and retirees. Notably, there was a delegation of Chinese painters and calligraphers returning home from a cultural exhibition in Kuala Lumpur, as well as a French family on holiday and a young couple from Australia who were expecting their first child. The early stages of the flight were entirely routine. After takeoff, MH370 climbed to a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet as it made its way northeast across the Malay Peninsula and toward the South China Sea. At 1:07 a.m., the Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System sent its final routine transmission, reporting that all systems were operating normally. At 1:19 a.m., as the plane approached the boundary between Malaysian and Vietnamese airspace, First Officer Farik radioed Kuala Lumpur Area Control Center with the now infamous final words, "Good night, Malaysian 370. This was standard procedure for a handoff between air traffic control zones. However, what followed was anything but ordinary. Just 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the aircraft's transponder ceased functioning, effectively removing it from civilian radar systems. Simultaneously, it vanished from secondary radar without any distress call, emergency beacon, or Mayday transmission. Vietnamese air traffic controllers, expecting the handover, noticed the absence of contact but assumed a minor delay. It wasn't until nearly 5:30 a.m., almost 4 hours after the last known transmission, that Malaysian Airlines officially acknowledged the plane was missing. Initial searches were launched in the South China Sea, where the aircraft was last tracked by radar. However, as the hours turned into days and the days into weeks, more complex data began to emerge. Military radar from Malaysia detected that, shortly after disappearing from civilian radar, the plane had turned sharply westward, doubling back across the Malay Peninsula before heading northwest over the Andaman Sea. The aircraft continued flying for several more hours, according to satellite handshake signals, which were automated hourly pings exchanged between MH370 and a satellite operated by British firm Inmarsat. These signals continued until 8:19 a.m., suggesting the aircraft remained airborne for nearly 7 hours after its initial disappearance. The last known radar detection from Malaysian military sources occurred at 2:22 a.m., when MH370 was observed over the Andaman Sea, northwest of Penang Island. After that, it disappeared once again, this time from military radar as well. At 2:40 a.m., after exhaustive attempts to re-establish communication and verify radar data, air traffic controllers formally informed Malaysia Airlines that they had lost all contact with the aircraft. At this point, panic began to rise within the airline's operations center. The aircraft's fuel load suggested it could remain airborne until approximately 8:30 a.m., but with no communication and no confirmed sightings, its status became increasingly dire with each passing minute. As the first hints of dawn spread across Southeast Asia, a large-scale search and rescue operation was mobilized. Initially, efforts were focused on the South China Sea and the Gulf of Thailand, where the aircraft was last recorded on civilian radar. Dozens of ships, aircraft, and personnel from several countries including Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and the United States converged on the suspected crash area. Search grids were plotted, debris fields were anticipated, and sonar buoys were deployed to detect potential underwater signals from the aircraft's black boxes. Yet nothing, no wreckage, no distress beacon, no oil slick was found in the area. The silence was deafening. The fact that MH370 had made such a dramatic deviation from its flight plan without triggering any immediate security response also exposed vulnerabilities in international airspace management. By the time dawn broke fully over Southeast Asia on March 8, 2014, MH370 had been missing for over 6 hours, and the world was beginning to realize that the story unfolding was not merely about a lost aircraft, but about a haunting aviation anomaly that would shake global trust in modern flight safety and tracking systems for years to come. But wait, it's much more complicated than that. The mystery deepens. By March 19th, only 11 days after the aircraft vanished without a trace, a series of independent eyewitness reports began emerging from disparate and often remote parts of the Indian Ocean and Southeast Asia. Some of the earliest came from the Maldives, particularly from islanders near Kuta Huvadhu in the Dahalu Atoll. Several residents there reported seeing a low-flying aircraft with red and blue stripes, which is indeed the case with Malaysia Airlines Boeing 777 aircraft. The witnesses described the plane as flying unusually low and making a loud noise, which many said was out of the ordinary for their quiet coastal surroundings. These testimonies prompted follow-up questions from media and researchers, though they were not immediately incorporated into official search efforts. The Maldives lie to the southwest of MH370's last known trajectory, suggesting the possibility of a flight path far more westward and extensive than initially assumed. Further south, near the Indonesian island of Kota Baru, villagers also described witnessing a low-flying aircraft at an unusual time of night, with some residents claiming it was flying erratically or at an abnormal altitude. These reports raised alarms, particularly because of the plane's proximity to populated areas. Yet again, no radar data corroborated the sightings. Meanwhile, Vietnamese authorities received a startling claim from an oil rig worker named Michael McKay, who was stationed on the Songa Mercure platform approximately 1863 miles southeast of a point referred to in the report as Wong. McKay submitted a detailed written statement explaining that he had observed a large aircraft on fire in the early hours of March 8th. According to him, the plane appeared to be descending rapidly, trailing smoke before vanishing below the horizon. Vietnamese officials deemed the account serious enough to initiate a targeted search, although no debris was ever recovered from that region. Eyewitness reports continued to trickle in over the next few months. In a striking case reported in June 2014, a British yachtswoman named Catherine T., who had been sailing alone across the Indian Ocean en route to Phuket, Thailand, claimed she had seen an airplane in flames passing overhead in the night sky. T's account was particularly gripping. She recalled seeing a trail of smoke and what looked like fire along the fuselage, followed by a swift descent into the ocean. She did not realize at the time the relevance of what she had witnessed, only later connecting it with the flight's disappearance after hearing news about MH370. Despite the vividness of her recollection, like many other accounts, her sighting occurred hundreds of miles from other reported locations and did not result in any confirmed findings. As these mysterious reports accumulated, so too did the evolution of theories surrounding how MH370 might have entered the water. In the early stages of the investigation, some aviation analysts proposed a scenario in which the aircraft was gently glided into the sea, possibly under the control of a conscious pilot, perhaps even a hijacker. This theory was supported in part by the absence of a debris field initially. After all, a controlled descent would theoretically result in less fragmentation, delaying the appearance of floating wreckage. It also lent weight to suspicions about Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, who, while widely respected for his professionalism, was also found to have practiced long-distance overwater flight simulations at home, much like MH370's final path. Though this evidence was circumstantial, it opened up the possibility that the plane could have been deliberately flown far off course and landed intentionally in a remote, untraceable part of the ocean. However, as more data became available, particularly through satellite communications analyzed by Inmarsat and other agencies, the controlled landing theory began to lose ground. By mid-2014, investigators began to lean more heavily toward a high-speed, uncontrolled descent. Analysis of the satellite handshakes, which are brief, automated connections between the aircraft and satellites, even in the absence of voice communication, suggested that the plane may have exhausted its fuel reserves and then plunged steeply into the southern Indian Ocean. Simulations run by Boeing and international aviation experts indicated that such a descent would occur at near supersonic speeds, possibly exceeding 15,000 feet per minute in the final moments. If true, this would result in an impact with catastrophic force, likely obliterating the aircraft on contact and scattering fragments deep into the sea, far below the surface. This shift in thinking marked a turning point in the investigation. The notion of a clean, controlled water ditching was now being replaced with one of a vertical nosedive, a chaotic final plunge that left no survivors and almost no trace. But this opens up more questions than it answers. Why did MH370 divert from its original path? Who was in control of the aircraft in its final hours? And perhaps most haunting of all, what happened on board during those long, silent hours when the plane flew into darkness, invisible and unanswered? Well, we can only answer these queries based on established facts. The story of official search efforts. By January 2017, nearly 3 years after Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 disappeared, the largest and most expensive underwater search in aviation history officially came to an end. Coordinated jointly by Malaysia, Australia, and China, the search had combed over 120,000 square kilometers of the southern Indian Ocean, a vast and remote expanse that had been pinpointed as the most likely crash site based on satellite data and drift pattern analysis. Despite the scale of the effort and the advanced technologies deployed, including deep-sea sonar, autonomous underwater vehicles, and advanced oceanographic modeling, not a single definitive piece of wreckage was found in the search zone. With no confirmed answers and no resolution in sight, the 3 governments made the difficult decision to suspend the operation, citing the diminishing likelihood of success and the high cost of continued efforts. But the story did not end there. In 2018, an American ocean exploration company called Ocean Infinity stepped in, offering to resume the search independently. Driven by a no-find, no-fee agreement, the company took on the challenge with renewed determination and a fleet of sophisticated underwater drones capable of mapping the seabed in detail far beyond previous attempts. With permission from the Malaysian government, Ocean Infinity launched a fresh expedition that pushed into uncharted parts of the Indian Ocean and aimed to test alternative hypotheses about where the aircraft might have gone down. Ocean Infinity's vessels, most notably the Seabed Constructor, searched approximately 112,000 square kilometers over several months, scanning areas both adjacent to and beyond the original search zone. Using a team of engineers, analysts, and remote operators, the company conducted one of the most thorough private searches ever undertaken for a missing aircraft. But by May 2018, the expedition concluded with no meaningful results. Despite covering immense territory with cutting-edge equipment, Ocean Infinity, like the government-led search before it, was unable to locate the plane or any additional debris beyond what had already been found years earlier. The silence of the seabed was, once again, absolute. Then came a new twist in July 2018, when the Malaysian government released its long-awaited final report on the disappearance of Flight MH370, spanning hundreds of pages and drawing on years of technical analysis, flight data, radar information, and crew background checks. The report was meant to offer closure, or at the very least, a definitive explanation. Instead, it did the opposite. The report ultimately concluded that it was highly unlikely that a mechanical malfunction or systems failure was responsible for the plane's disappearance. All major aircraft systems had been operating normally before the moment the transponder went offline. Furthermore, no distress call had been made, and no emergency protocols were initiated, pointing away from the likelihood of a catastrophic onboard failure. Most striking, however, was the report's suggestion that human intervention may have played a role. Perhaps someone inside the cockpit deliberately deviated from the planned route. The aircraft's abrupt turn back across the Malay Peninsula and its silent trajectory into the southern Indian Ocean were not consistent with a plane simply suffering technical failure. Flight data indicated that someone had entered complex navigational waypoints into the flight management system, something that could only have been done by someone with intimate knowledge of the aircraft's systems. The idea of human intervention was not new. From the early days of the investigation, there had been whispers of pilot suicide, rogue takeovers, or even elaborate hijacking theories. But this time, it came from an official source, and it carried weight. Still, the report also stated that there was no conclusive evidence implicating either of the pilots or anyone on board, and it carefully avoided assigning blame. The flight crew's backgrounds had been scrutinized extensively, And while some anomalies, like Captain Zahari's home flight simulator data, raised questions, nothing was definitively incriminating. The 2018 report only compounded the ambiguity. The tone was cautious, filled with technical details, but lacking a firm conclusion. It acknowledged the failure of the search efforts, the insufficiency of evidence, and the tormenting reality that, without wreckage or black boxes, the truth might never be known. For families of the missing, the report was a bitter pill. It confirmed what many had feared, that the mystery of MH370 was no closer to being solved than it had been on that fateful March morning in 2014. So, was the plane really hijacked? Well, let's dig into what we know. Hijacking theory and passport anomalies. With no wreckage recovered and no distress signals ever sent, one of the earliest and most enduring lines of inquiry focused on the possibility of a hijacking. That theory gained immediate traction when it was revealed that 2 passengers on board the flight had boarded using stolen passports, one Austrian, the other Italian. The passports had been reported stolen in Thailand several months before the incident, and although both were flagged in Interpol's database, no checks were made against the international alert system during the boarding process. This lapse exposed a critical flaw in global aviation security. Malaysia's then Deputy Prime Minister, Ahmad Zahid Hamidi, was publicly critical of the oversight, calling it an unacceptable failure of immigration protocols. The tickets for the 2 men traveling under false identities were one-way and had been paid for in cash. The transactions had been handled through China Southern Airlines and were traced back to Bangkok, where an Iranian national had facilitated the booking on behalf of the 2 men. Further investigation into the identities of these individuals revealed that they were both Iranian, aged 19 and 29, traveling with valid Iranian passports in addition to the stolen European ones. Their goal, it appears, however, was to seek asylum in Europe. Interpol was quick to release a statement clarifying that there was no evidence linking either man to any known terrorist group. In fact, family members of the younger passenger confirmed he was en route to reunite with his mother in Germany. Intelligence agencies from the United States, Malaysia, China, and other countries launched exhaustive background checks into the lives of all 227 passengers. The scrutiny extended into their travel history, financial records, personal affiliations, and political beliefs. Yet, the collective efforts produced no link between any of the passengers and terrorist organizations or extremist ideologies. The passenger manifest included families, students, business people, and tourists, none of whom raised serious red flags beyond the 2 Iranian nationals, who had already been cleared of malicious intent. Nevertheless, speculation in the public sphere flourished. One of the more persistent theories that gained traction online suggested that an Iranian-born, Swiss-based flight engineer with high-level knowledge of Boeing aircraft could have taken control of the plane. This individual, though not among the passengers, was posthumously linked to a theory in which he allegedly instructed or influenced someone aboard to hijack the aircraft. According to proponents of this idea, his knowledge of aircraft avionics and remote systems made him a potential architect of a sophisticated operation. However, no tangible connection between him and the flight ever materialized. An even more speculative theory emerged from geopolitical tensions at the time. With Russia's annexation of Crimea unfolding in parallel with the MH370 disappearance, some theorists posited that Russian operatives may have orchestrated the hijacking to divert global attention. The aircraft, according to this narrative, was either brought down deliberately or flown to a remote airstrip in Kazakhstan or another covert location. But again, no satellite imagery, intercepted communications, or physical evidence supported this theory, and most aviation experts regarded it as highly implausible. In any case, the lack of closure fed a firestorm of hypotheses from the rational to the fantastical, each attempting to explain how a 63.7-meter-long Boeing 777, with a wingspan of over 60 meters and carrying 239 people, could simply disappear from the face of the Earth. Ultimately, none of the hijacking theories were ever proven. But wait, there's more! In the days and weeks following the disappearance of Flight MH370, loved ones, frantic and holding on to any thread of hope, began calling the mobile numbers of the passengers on board. To their astonishment, some of those calls appeared to ring, more than once in certain cases. For those already reeling from the uncertainty, the ringing tones were not just technical quirks. They were signs of life. Yet this wave of hope collided quickly with the cold, impersonal logic of telecommunications technology. Experts in the field stepped in to explain that the ringing tone did not necessarily mean the phone was connected or powered on. Instead, it indicated that the cellular network was attempting to locate the phone and complete the call. Once the phone was deemed unreachable, the ringing stopped and the call was diverted to voicemail or failed entirely. It's a familiar behavior anyone who has called a turned-off phone might recognize. An artificial ring generated by the network, not the actual device. Compounding the enigma was the eerie digital silence that followed the plane's deviation from its flight path. After it turned back over the Malaysian peninsula and made its way across the Strait of Malacca, not a single phone call, text message, or social media update came from anyone on board. In an era where nearly everyone carries a smartphone and where in-flight connectivity is increasingly common, this total lack of digital communication struck many as profoundly unusual. If the plane had remained airborne for hours, as radar and satellite data later confirmed, why hadn't at least one person tried to reach out? One possibility was that the aircraft remained at a high altitude, far too high for cell phones to connect with ground-based towers. Commercial airliners typically cruise at around 35,000 feet, but connecting to a cellular network requires much lower altitudes, usually under 10,000 feet, and often within proximity to populated areas. If the passengers were unable to detect anything amiss, or if the situation escalated too quickly for them to react, the absence of communication might be explained. Another possibility was more troubling. Perhaps attempts were made to contact loved ones, but the devices were somehow jammed, disabled, or confiscated. Some theorists went even further, suggesting the phones may have been systematically switched off, or their batteries removed by someone on board. Radar data released later revealed erratic and highly unusual altitude changes after the plane turned west. At one point, the aircraft reportedly ascended to 45,000 feet, well above the aircraft's standard cruising ceiling. Then it plunged to 23,000 feet before climbing again to around 500 feet. These dramatic shifts in altitude are not typical of commercial flights and may have had devastating effects on the passengers. Sudden changes in cabin pressure or oxygen availability could have rendered those on board unconscious. It also may explain why no phone signals ever connected, even if the aircraft dipped close to ground level for brief moments. The erratic flight pattern only served to bolster the theory that someone inside the cockpit was in full control of the aircraft and executing a deliberate plan. U.S. intelligence officials and aviation experts, after months of poring over satellite data and radar signatures, began to suspect that the flight's deviation was the result of an intentional act. This line of thinking turned the investigation's focus toward those in control of the plane, particularly the pilots. The captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, and his co-pilot, Fariq Abdul Hamid, became the subject of intense scrutiny. Authorities in Malaysia conducted thorough searches of their homes, seizing computers and flight simulators. Financial records, recent communications, and psychological profiles were examined for any hint of distress, intent, or secret planning. While some found Zahari's personal life marked by signs of isolation and a possibly strained marriage, worthy of deeper inquiry, no conclusive evidence of wrongdoing or a planned hijacking was ever uncovered. The same held true for Farik, who had been enthusiastic about his career and had no known issues that might suggest a motive for foul play. Another dead end. But we know one thing for sure. The plane was indeed lost at sea. A renewed search for the wreckage. In the years following the disappearance of Flight MH370, several wreckage pieces were found scattered across remote parts of the Indian Ocean, fueling hopes that they could provide crucial answers to the mystery of the plane's final moments. The first confirmed piece of debris, a wing flaperon, was discovered on the shores of Réunion Island, a French overseas territory in the Indian Ocean, on July 29, 2015, more than a year after the flight vanished. The flaperon, a key component of an aircraft's wing, was found by a beachcomber, and its identification was a major breakthrough, confirming that the aircraft had indeed crashed into the ocean. In the years that followed, additional pieces of wreckage, including part of a wing, a part of the fuselage, and other smaller items, were discovered along the coasts of various islands in the western Indian Ocean, including Madagascar, Mozambique, and Tanzania. Despite these discoveries, the wreckage pieces, though telling in their own right, offered little concrete evidence about the exact location of the aircraft's main wreckage or the ultimate fate of those on board. The absence of a comprehensive wreckage field only deepened the mystery. What became evident, however, was the vastness of the area that needed to be covered and the difficulty in pinpointing the final resting place of the aircraft. The sheer size of the search area, spanning thousands of square miles of deep, featureless ocean, presented an enormous challenge for the search teams. Now, a renewed search for the wreckage of Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 is currently underway. In December 2024, the Malaysian government approved a new search initiative led by the US-based marine exploration company Ocean Infinity. This operation is structured as a no-find, no-fee agreement, meaning the company will only be compensated if substantial wreckage is discovered. The company had tried and failed before, but this time, they've come prepared. Ocean Infinity has deployed advanced autonomous underwater vehicles capable of diving beyond 6,000 meters and operating for up to 100 hours. The search focuses on a 15,000 square kilometer area in the southern Indian Ocean, approximately 1,500 kilometers west of Perth, Australia. Additionally, a retired researcher, Dr. Vincent Line, has suggested that satellite data indicates a possible crash site in the Diamantina fracture zone. In any case, this renewed search offers hope that the mystery of MH370 may eventually be resolved. Despite the lack of concrete results, the search for MH370 remains one of the most extensive and mysterious investigations in aviation history. The disappearance of Flight MH370 and the ongoing search for its wreckage remains a deeply emotional and unresolved issue for the families of the 239 people who were aboard that ill-fated flight. While parts of the wreckage have been found scattered across the Indian Ocean, the true location of the plane's final resting place and the ultimate cause of its disappearance remain unanswered questions that continue to fuel speculation, investigation, and hope for closure. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.